Hi everyone, I'm Michelle from michellesmidheaven.com, and today I would like to share a chart with you of a person with a very unusual life, I would say. And I think that this might be interesting in terms of the topic of malefics as well as the topic of exalted planets. So when people learn about exalted planets and they don't have any in their natal chart, they might be a little disappointed, as it's generally said to be very fortunate to have planets in their exaltation. Well, they might change their mind after seeing this example. So I'm going to pull up the chart, but before I do that, I like to give a little disclaimer here because some of the things that I'm going to reveal about this person's life are not pretty and might be a little shocking. I'm going to treat this chart as a mystery chart so I can reveal things very gradually, but be warned. All right, here we go. So what are some of the things that should catch our eye straight away? First of all, we see an emphasis on the first house, seventh house axis, and this axis revolves around who we are and who we deal with, or how we are affected by other people. The importance of relationships is underlined here by the presence of the two luminaries, the sun and the moon. So this person was born under a full moon. We can see the moon in the first house applying to an opposition with the sun in the seventh house. So as oppositions show a form of tension, we could say that there might be some friction right from the start between the environment that the native finds themselves in and their own sense of purpose and whatever they feel compelled to do in this lifetime. And this was certainly the case in this person's life. And I guess to put things into perspective just a little bit, it doesn't hurt to reveal that this is the chart of a woman who was born in Europe around the end of the 19th century. So the moon represents the mother in every chart, we could say, and we see the moon here applying to what ancient astrologers called the greater malefic, and that is Saturn. In fact, the moon first hits a trine to the lesser malefic, Mars, here in the fifth house, and then it applies to Saturn, which is interesting as it means that the moon is about to be enclosed between the two malefics. But for now, the moon and Saturn together here, we can say that this person probably had a troublesome relationship with their mother. And this mother could be a little bit demanding or uncompromising. And at the same time, this Moon-Saturn combination is in the first house, which means that it will also speak to the character of the native. So it kind of goes both ways. Well, the native fell in love with a man, but her mother didn't approve and wanted her to get married to someone else. She didn't listen. She got married to the man she loved and moved to another town. However, after she got married, she got consumed with the idea that her marriage had been cursed by her mother, and this idea would really haunt her, maybe for the rest of her life. And I think that this belief, or this superstition, we could say, would be quite pronounced because of Jupiter, who is said to be the greater benefic and who is the god of faith and confidence and trust. It is in the sign of Gemini here, and it is a sign of Jupiter's exile because Gemini is opposing Jupiter's sign Sagittarius. And Jupiter being exiled like this can signify some trust issues or a tendency to be more superstitious in general, since it would be slightly harder for Jupiter to create a reliable order or framework that we all need and that we all try to build when we want to make sense of the world. So let's go back for a minute to this person's character here in the first house. Saturn is exalted here, and I want to explain very briefly what exaltations are. So most of you will know that every sign of the zodiac has a ruler, a so-called domicile ruler, and the planet feels very comfortable in its own house or in its own domicile. So for example, we have Libra here. Well, Venus would have been very happy to be in its own domicile here in Libra. Now, for ancient astrologers, there were some additional sets of rulerships, and one particularly important one was exaltation rulership. So each of the 7 traditional planets was said to be exalted in one zodiac sign. Now, what does that mean? Even though the source texts give us little information, we know that exalted planets were said to be very strong and very powerful. Well, we could see an exalted planet as an honored guest in another planet's house. And I think it's important to look at it from the point of view of the people who lived in ancient Greece. So the ancient custom of hospitality, or philoxenos, was about offering protection to a stranger to avoid possible hostility from that stranger, as strangers were seen as potentially dangerous. So philoxenos literally translates as love of strangers. And through the lens of history, I think of an exalted planet as a stranger who is treated better than it might deserve. So the host planet serves its exalted guest 5-course meals and offers gentle massages each night in order to keep their guests happy. So here in this graphic, you see the 7 traditional planets and the signs of their exaltations. And I've also included the exact exaltation degrees that are intensified forms of exaltation. So Saturn will be exalted anywhere in the sign of Libra, but if it is in the 21st degree of Libra, it will be super exalted, so to speak. And this is what we have right here. Saturn is in its superpower position, and this happens to be right on the exact degree of the ascendant as well. So Saturn is extra powerful here. For good or for bad, we'll see about that. So let's keep in mind, though, that Saturn does not only signify unfavorable traits, though. Not at all, actually. I think that our mystery person here must have made quite a good impression on other people. Saturn in Libra knows how to keep up appearances. Saturn is also associated with popularity. And having Saturn's signature in the first house might mean that the native is very mindful of what's in and what's out, or capable of acting very distinguished and socially adapted. And it would have been very easy for her to blend in into any type of social circle, especially since this exalted Saturn is ruled by Venus, who is also exalted because it's in Pisces over here in the 6th. And this will really infuse her personality and character with affection and gentleness, tact and grace. And another testimony, by the way, would be this beautiful sun in the house of her social life, which is the 7th house. And guess what? The sun is in Aries, which means that the sun is also exalted. So we have 3 exalted planets in this chart, which is pretty impressive. Now, this malefic Saturn is overcome by Jupiter, and Jupiter is making a trine to Saturn. And this adds a lot more to the picture. So she would surely have been someone who looked grand, distinguished, eminent, or imposing. And she would certainly have been clever enough to influence others and even twist them around her little finger if necessary. Well, 6 years into her marriage, she was arrested and imprisoned for fraud. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any details about this particular event, but rest assured there's a lot more to come. A lot more. After she was released, she and her husband moved to another town. And I suspect that was because of the obvious damage to her reputation, right? So in this new town, another tragedy happened because there was an earthquake and their new home was destroyed by it. So you see Saturn ruling the fourth house of home and family, and also again the moon applying to Saturn. So that is really like the moon doesn't find a home and security. And, once again, they move to another town. It's also good to notice here that Saturn is retrograde. So with the ruler of the fourth house being retrograde, she finds a new home, but then it is taken away again. There will be reversals and setbacks, and that is what retrograde planets can do. Anyway, the couple moves to a different town again, and that's where she opens a shop. That turned out to be very successful, and she was said to be very popular and well respected within her neighborhood. Again, she would have been very much aware of how to present herself. Now, there is this other dreadful tragedy in her life, and that has to do with the topic of children. For children, we look at the fifth house here, and that's where the other malefic, Mars, is. And Mars is also placed in Aquarius, which is ruled by the malefic Saturn. So a malefic ruled by a malefic, that looks quite ominous here. And we might expect some misfortunes that have to do with children. Well, it turns out that she had no less than 17 pregnancies during her marriage. However, sadly, she lost a lot of children. First, she lost 3 of her children in miscarriages, and then 10 more. And she lost 10 children while they were still in their youth. So those malefics hit her incredibly hard, right? So of those 17 pregnancies, only 4 of her children survived. And I bet it's not very hard to imagine how worried and how protective she must have been of the remaining 4 children. This is not only about that fifth house, it's also, again, this moon moving into Saturn. That can be a really tough placement, and it can have a lot of different significations, even though it is generally going to tell us that there will be rough circumstances, especially around home and family. Now, she became overprotective of her kids, and this was fueled by superstition. Remember, she was absolutely convinced that she was cursed by her mother. And then additionally, she had received a warning from a diviner that all of her children would die young. She also visited a palm reader who told her something along the lines of, in your right hand, I see prison. In your left hand, I see a criminal asylum. So that certainly would have given the poor woman the creeps. And again, that Jupiter in the 9th house being exiled to the sign of Gemini, Well, in a very cynical or macabre way, I guess, you could say that Jupiter has its advantages or its positive side because Jupiter has been an honest counselor here in the ninth house of divination. I mean, in the sense that it is true what these people have predicted, what they warned her about, but that must have been pretty nerve-wracking, pretty devastating, right? So, unsurprisingly, we might say that the whole doom and gloom circumstances around her children and the story she had created around that really began to spin out of control. She became excessively protective. And while I was reading her biography, I couldn't help but think of this Moon Saturn combination in an overcoming trine aspect to the fifth house of children as a divine signature of the Jungian archetype of the devouring mother. Her overly vigilant behavior came to a head when the Second World War broke out, and her eldest son was going to join the army. I mean, can you imagine what she must have felt like? Naturally, she was determined to protect her son at all costs. And the best way to do that in her mind was through an act of sacrifice. This would be a good time to point out that Mars is actually the planet of sacrifice and, well, blood sacrifice also. So, whenever her children or her son is involved, this Mars in the fifth house will be activated. And together with this overcoming trine from the devouring mother mark in the first house, this might mean that some martial, courageous, but possibly drastic measures might be taken in order to protect her son. Mars has its joy in the sixth house, which is called the house of bad fortune. And we see Venus here in the sixth house, which is the significator of her character as it is ruling the first house, Libra. So you could say that she's definitely capable of making sacrifices. And since Venus is exalted here in Pisces, we might say that this sacrifice might express itself in an over the top way. And I think that you'll agree that this is the case since she came to the conclusion that her son's safety required special sacrifices, human sacrifices. So that's what happened. She carefully planned a strategy to murder 3 women. Both the moon and Venus represent women in general in the chart. And I think it's appropriate to look at both of them, Moon Saturn, and then Venus here in the sixth house of sacrifice. Well, she wrapped these women around her finger, telling one of them who was a spinster, stories about her having the opportunity to connect with a suitable partner in a faraway town. And she promised to other women that there was a great job opportunity waiting for them also in a faraway town. And somehow these 3 women bought her stories, and she succeeded in making sure that nobody would look for these women, as she would let them write letters to their family and friends before they left town, so to speak. Now, she also received money of her victims as compensation for, well, the wonderful help that she gave them. Very clever. So she must have sounded very convincing and reliable to be able to pull that off. She sacrificed or murdered all 3 of them by means of offering them a glass of drugged wine right before they would leave town. And then she would kill them with an axe. But that's not all. She needed to dispose of the bodies, and she found a very Venusian way to do that. Like I said, Venus is in the joy of Mars here in the sixth house, which indicates injuries and sacrifice and consequently blood. Now, what is an exalted Venus doing here in this kind of situation? Well, how about baking some crunchy tea cakes from the blood of her victims? I'll spare you the details, but you'll find you'll find the recipe on Wikipedia, and I'm not kidding. She and her son ate the cakes, but she also served them to neighbors and anyone who came to visit them at the time. But that's not all. So from the rest of the bodies that she cut into smaller pieces, she made soap. Very Venusian, right? Creamy soap is how it was described. And she gave some soap bars to her neighbors. Lucky neighbors. Well, I'll reveal whose chart this is now. This was an Italian woman, Leonarda Cianciulli, and she was arrested when one of her victim's sisters became suspicious. And Leonarda actually confessed to the murders only to protect her son once again. Her son was treated as a suspect at first, and that's why she came forward as the perpetrator. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum, as was predicted. So what I'm getting from this story is that the diviner and the palm reader were right all along. Well, it's true though. I hope in any case that this example was helpful to shed some light on the fact that a chart that has several exalted planets like this one with the Sun, Venus, Saturn, all exalted. But this is not necessarily a pristine lollipop rose garden of life, is it? Over the top, yes, it's completely over the top. And happiness, well, no, not necessarily. Exalted planets don't necessarily give you all this happiness and joy in your life. Well, that's all I've got for you. And I think that was more than enough. Thank you so much for watching. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And why not go ahead and visit my website, michellesmidheaven.com, to subscribe to my new moon's letter, which I send out, well, every new moon, duh. I'd love to read your comments, so please leave a message and have a wonderful rest of the weekend. Bye for now.